Tomi Lahren, who is a conservative cultural commentator, she invited Krystal onto her show to debate. For those of you that don't know, Tomi Lahren used to be this huge rising star within the conservative media space. You know, she originally worked at The Blaze, but she was ultimately fired, I believe in 2017, for giving some pro-choice views on The View. Right now, as of right now, she has her own YouTube channel called Tomi Lahren is Fearless, and she invited Krystal on to debate certain things regarding what's going on with ICE, what's going on with freedom of speech, what's going on with this, this increasing cultural rift that we're seeing within society. And what's interesting about this debate is that it really goes to show how when you have someone who is largely focused on cultural issues, what some would consider, I guess, cultural slop issues, only talking about, trans stuff, people with pronouns in their bio. Oh, like, look how crazy and woke the other side is. It really shows you how these people run into a brick wall when they debate someone that actually knows what they're talking about instead of just debating college students. And so Tomi Lahren invites Krystal, who is from Breaking Points. She used to work for The Hill. She knows her stuff. Whether or not you agree with her or disagree with her, the one thing that you have to acknowledge, at least, is that she's very knowledgeable when it comes to these issues. And so if she's up against someone whose understanding of political issues, of cultural issues, really just comes from a cultural slop type of lens, you're gonna have a bad time. And that's exactly what Tomi Lahren had. She had a horrible time. And so we're gonna look at some of the most interesting clips from that debate, because it really is a sight to behold. So in this first clip, they're talking about whether or not Donald Trump and the MAGA movement is fascistic, whether or not Donald Trump employs fascist tactics, whether or not people who support Donald Trump are therefore fascists themselves. So they're talking about that. And before this clip that I'm about to show you, Tomi Lahren was also going over how the rhetoric that the left uses is inflammatory and it helps incite violence because they're calling everyone racist, they're calling everyone fascist and all that stuff. And so that's kind of just some background information going into this next clip that we'll be watching here. Let's just go ahead and give this clip a listen.
I want to have the discussion. I know that you tweet a lot about it, and I'm very interested to hear if you think President Trump is a fascist, and if you think that I, by definition, as a conservative, am also a fascist.
I don't think everyone who supports President Trump is a fascist. I do think that President Trump is a fascist, though. And I'll give you a perfect example, Tommy. It's kind of an awkward day for you to give this spiel because Trump is speaking to all the generals today in Quantico. And he just said that he's going to use the military against the enemy within, which is part and parcel of what he's been doing with deploying the National Guard in cities across the country. So when you ask about definition of fascism, the president really sort of gave his own definition of fascism today.
So Krystal here is referring to the military speech conducted by Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump, where they gave the most partisan speech imaginable to some of these top military generals in the United States. And Trump, during this meeting, as well as before, he has consistently been talking about the enemy within the actual United States. And one of the things that we have to recognize about fascism is that fascism isn't as clean of a political ideology as something like communism is. Fascism is best viewed as an approach to politics rather than a political ideology itself. And one of the reasons is because it can manifest itself in different ways. You can have left-wing fascism, you can have right-wing fascism. And so because of this, it's much better to describe it as an approach to politics. And so when we look at historically, the way in which fascists have utilized rhetoric, the way in which they've described the situation going on within their country, one of the things that they all seem to talk about, or they all seem to be concerned about, is the enemy within. So Hitler used that verbiage exactly. Stalin used it. Kim Il-sung, shortly after the 1956 desalinization efforts in North Korea, he was talking about the enemy within. He's talking about the Soviet Koreans, that you need to remove them from the party because they are the ones that are posing a threat to the Democratic Republic of North Korea. And so fascists previously have used this type of rhetoric in order to scare people into supporting them. Because if you tell them that the enemy is actually, the enemy actually might be the person that they lunch with at work, that's going to amp up the temperature within society. That's going to amp up a lot of people's anxieties about how it is that they are going about their normal day-to-day lives. And so Trump does this over and over and over again. He talks about the enemy within.
I know you want to agree with that, but
Yeah,
let me just make a broader point here.
Yeah, I want to dive into
Well, let me just make a broader point here because, I think as someone who came from a side that did a lot of tone policing, and by the way, called out people who were policing rhetoric and doing the whole cancel culture thing, I would really caution you from going down this path, especially as someone who, is a commentator, uses your words for a living. I know in the past, I did a little bit of research. You called people who were enforcing mask protocols Nazis. President Trump has, of course, used his language in quite aggressive ways, including calling Kamala Harris and others fascist, radical leftists, communists, et cetera, et cetera. Do I think that that was inciting violence against Kamala Harris? Do I think you were inciting violence against people who were enforcing mask mandates? No. So I think we have to really maintain this commitment to First Amendment free speech, even in the face of incredible crackdowns from this administration in ways that are truly extraordinary and quite dystopian.
So Krystal Ball wonderfully calls out Tomi Lahren and other conservative commentators as well for them constantly, over and over and over again, criticizing the left for allegedly using bombastic language that incites violence, calling everyone a racist, calling everyone a fascist, when they literally do the same exact thing. How many times have you heard conservative commentators call Obama and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden dangerous communists? The president of the United States says things like that. And so when they say things like this, the bombastic language that, according to them, if employed by the other side, is inciting violence, but when they use it, apparently it's okay.
And you have to put it together, Tomi. I genuinely want to ask you this question. Like, is there nothing that he's done that you feel like, it's a little too far? Like, we've had the tariffs, which have been wild and unilaterally imposed. We've got Palantir getting contracts to surveil anyone and everyone they want to. We have people being sent to a foreign gulag with zero due process. We have National Guard being deployed in city after city after city. You have American citizens. I mean, I don't know if you saw this video.
Which cities has he deployed National Guard to besides protecting
LA,
federal?
DC, Memphis,
Yeah.
Portland.
We invited him here. We invited him to
states.
Tennessee. We invited him to Tennessee. Governor invited him to come clean up the streets of Memphis because they desperately need the help. So this is, I'm genuinely curious in this.
But Tomi, can you respond to the question though? None of this you feel
No,
like,
none of this-
this is a little too far.
No.
Saying,
Tomi here is reminding me of that guy on the Jubilee video it was the Destiny versus 20 or 25, however some odd MAGA conservatives, the roundtable Jubilee thing that they have. It reminds me of like that one guy who Destiny asked him if there's anything that Donald Trump has done that he doesn't like.
Trump is gangster. Remember
Can you give me
that.
one thing you don't like about Trump?
What I don't like about him, I love everything about
I know,
Trump.
because it's a f***ing cult. Thank you.
It's not a cult.
Gives him the exact type of response that you would expect a cult member to respond with. And Tomi here is effectively doing the same thing. There is nothing, like, this is the big thing that you'll notice with political conservative commentators, especially many of those who have actually become intimately chummy with Trump, is that they'll never criticize him at all. There's like, remember when Dave Rubin claimed that he was going to hold Donald Trump's feet to the fire, only for him to end up sucking him off 24/7 and conveniently going offline whenever Donald Trump did something so transparently stupid and idiotic. It's the same thing here in the second administration, where conservative commentators, by and large, are just too to push back against Trump. They're too scared. They don't want to. They're either too scared or too sycophantic or just too brainwashed or like too ideologically captured to even conceive of an argument against Trump. Like, this should have been an easy response by Tomi Lahren, but because she wasn't able to give a response and immediately pivoted towards something else, just goes to show you how ideologically captured these people have become.
policing comedians' monologues, right?
He's not
using lawsuits to threaten
whoa.
media, consolidating media in the hands of his
Krystal,
allies.
I know that you're not trying to allege that Jimmy Kimmel or Colbert were taken off the air because of President Trump.
They obviously were. I mean, Kimmel in particular, Colbert, you could make another argument about. But the FCC commissioner came out and said we could do this the easy way or the hard way. And next thing you know, Disney pulls the plug. Why? Because
why
they
did they
know that this
reinstate him then?
president weaponizes the federal government
Why was he
against his
reinstated?
adversaries.
How is that why does she think that's a good response? Why was he reinstated? If he was reinstated, therefore there must have been zero pressure from the government, from the current administration, to take Kimmel off, to take Colbert off. That doesn't make any sense. That's not in line with any of the arguments made regarding how Trump used the FCC to leverage these big corporations to take people like Colbert off, to take people like Kimmel off. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why is he reinstated? Because Disney started losing and hemorrhaging so much money because of this, because there was a huge pushback. Corporations at the end of the day just care about money, right? Largely, that's all they care about. Or, sorry, largely, that's mostly what they care about. So, of course, if they're going to be losing money, then yeah, they're going to cave and say, you know what, bring Kimmel back on, because the negative consequences that we are facing from putting him off are greater than the negative consequences that we are foreseeing from Trump if we were to bring him back on. That's all it is. This isn't a good, it's barely even an argument. Why is he back on? It almost sounds like a non sequitur. What are you talking about?
They're worried about their business deals because the backlash was so severe. Look, these people don't care about anything about their bottom line. I hope you agree with that. And they saw more than 1.7 million Disney customers cancel their Disney Plus subscriptions. So they were like, oh, we've got an even bigger problem here. But there is zero doubt that the intention is to chill speech, to make anyone who opposes this president think twice before they do that. That's what the university crackdowns are about. That's what the legal crackdowns are about. That's what kidnapping students off the street for writing an op-ed, that's what that's about. That's what the National Guard in the street is about. And that's what him saying to these generals today, we have to use the military against the enemy within. So you may not like the term fascist. You may not like it when it's thrown around by Democrats. You had no problem with it when it was thrown around by Trump, by the way. But that is, in fact, the accurate description of what we're seeing here. And so I have no problem with people trying to accurately describe the situation that they're experiencing in their own country.
Absolutely bodying Tomi Lahren right there, where she's giving examples of why she's using this type of language. Why are so many Americans calling Donald Trump a fascist? Here are examples of him acting in a fascist manner and just absolutely demolishing her. And I love how she calls out Tomi by saying, like, you're complaining about all of this rhetoric being employed by the other side, calling the MAGA conservatives fascists, Nazis, whatever, when your own president is engaging in the same exact identical behavior towards his political opposition. This is the guy that has a nickname for every world leader. So this idea that political commentators or your average person has to conduct themselves better than the president of the United States is ridiculous.
Do you think that I have so many questions for you? That whole thing, like democracy under attack, dictator on day one, that worked so well for you guys in November of last year. I'm actually shocked that you're still using it and you think that it's working on the American people. It didn't, and
but
it's
Tomi,
not.
Not everything is about a poll. Right. Some things are about, like, you actually have a principle and you actually care about protecting First Amendment.
I mean, to me, if you guys think that, though, that's
Tomi,
fine.
this is, to me,
Krystal,
one of the best things about America. Is
I do
my
too.
ability and your ability to say what we think.
What a weird statement for her to make, that you shouldn't call Donald Trump a fascist because it's not helping you. You guys lost the election, so therefore stop calling him a fascist. But if he is one, you should call him that and just accompany it with better arguments if it wasn't effective the last time. And Krystal rightly just says, like, well, if you're principled about something, it doesn't really matter how popular it is. The whole point of a principle being a principle is that you stand up for it, regardless of how inconvenient it might be or how unpopular it might be. That's how you should act. And that's part of the reason why politics is so screwed right now in the United States, is precisely because so many people refuse to stand by their principles. How many free speech warriors existed in 2020, 2021, when it was largely the left being censorial, and have now just disappeared completely, when you have Donald Trump being the most anti-First Amendment president that we've had in recent memory. And so I love that Krystal is, like, rightly criticizing her for this. And it's also hard to understand what Tomi Lahren's point would have been if this conversation were to continue on for a little bit longer. Like, is Tomi basically admitting that the way in which she chooses to engage in politics, what she says, how she says it, is mostly contingent on how well it's going to be received by her audience, rather than based on what she actually believes herself?
And I know you've been critical at times of Trump. I'm sure you'd like to preserve the ability to be so. I'm sure you'd like,
of course,
if there's a future Gavin Newsom or AOC administration.
Yeah, I don't think that.
But do you worry? Do you worry about the turnabout, though?
No, I don't.
Do you worry that when it's an AOC or a Gavin Newsom, that you're going to be the one put on the domestic terror watch list? Because that's what's happening right now.
That's a wonderful point made by Crystal Ball. The whole point of a principle is that you stand by it regardless of how unpopular it might be, right? Because let's give freedom of speech for an example. If we allow certain viewpoints to be silenced under the umbrella of it being hate speech, erroneously, right? Let's just say it's a viewpoint that's being silenced. They're saying that society shouldn't be able to listen to this viewpoint because it's viewed as hate speech. If the conservative administration is in power, the type of stuff that they would label as hate speech is probably a 180-degree turn away from what the Democrats would consider as hate speech. There's no consistent apparatus there to be able to determine what actually is hate speech. This is one of my criticisms of hate speech laws. They're just not effective, and they can be too easily manipulated to be used for political power, and we've seen that happen during this administration. But the reason why it's a principle where regardless of what political affiliation someone is a part of, you stand by their right to freedom of speech is precisely because when it's the other side that's in power, how do you know that they're not going to use their power against your freedom of speech? We have to defend each other's freedom of speech. Otherwise, it's just going to be a ping pong game back and forth where when the Democrats are in power, something that the conservatives are going to be saying is hate speech. When the conservatives are in power, anything that the Democrats say or the liberals say is going to be considered hate speech. That's why it's a principle. You have to stand up for it. It's basic game theory 101. If the current administration is not going to stand by these principles, or the people supporting this current administration, the MAGA folks, if they're not going to stand on principle in defense of freedom of speech, then they are going to have no room to defend freedom of speech when it's the Democrats that are in power and they are overextending their reach.
So if you did a little bit more research, you would know that your guy, AutoPen, actually did pressure social media companies to deplatform me, to move me
And
down
Tommy,
in the algorithm,
if
to
you
reduce
did
me.
a little bit of research, you would know that I complained and protested against those sorts of actions.
Well, I'm glad that
But
you did.
that is nothing compared to the way that this administration has used the whole of government, weaponized the whole of government in order to try to silence and coerce their critics. There is no doubt about it. The FCC commissioner coming out and directly saying, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. That is overt jawboning. That is overt threats to media companies. Then you have the lawsuits that are used to basically extract a bribe to coerce these media organizations. And then you have mass consolidation in the hands of Trump political allies. That's what's going on. So the First Amendment is under attack in a way we have never seen before, going back even to the days of George W. Bush and the Patriot Act and that surveillance, which I also objected to, by the way. It's hard for me when you spoke out against those things under the Biden administration and you have nothing to say about what's happening with the Trump administration. Look at the way they are trying to designate speech as material support for terrorism. Pam Bondi coming out and saying the exact woke thing that I'm sure you objected to in the past.
And I did disagree with that when Pam Bondi came out and said,
when Trump came out and said the exact same thing and said, you're not allowed to criticize me.
No, he did not say that.
Speech.
He never said that.
He
said, we're cracking down on Antifa and domestic terrorists.
So this next clip is going to be the last clip, and it's also the last segment of their debate where they're discussing Bad Bunny being at the performing for the Super Bowl, at the halftime Super Bowl show, and a lot of people are upset because Bad Bunny has said, has criticized the current administration, said things about ICE, and so that's some background info for this upcoming clip here.
Change course. I think that's a great idea for you guys. The last thing I want to talk to you about is because I'm about ready to do my commentary on it. But do you think Bad Bunny is a good choice for the Super Bowl?
I'm not that knowledgeable about him, but it seems fine, and I don't know why it's a big deal. Seems like a great American artist, so sure.
He's not an American artist, but
he's Puerto Rican. That's part of America, dear.
Yeah, you don't think you have any problem with him?
Wait, you're just not going to address that? Why'd you say he wasn't American? Why do so many MAGA conservatives think that if you're from Puerto Rico, you're not Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory. If you are born in Puerto Rico, you have U.S. citizenship. If you're born, you're an American. If you're from Puerto Rico, you're an American. This isn't a politically charged take. This is just basic facts. This is just a fact of reality.
Saying the ICE is, well, I'm sure you don't, mother effers and sons of and that he's not going to perform here due to immigration.
America agrees with him on that.
You
I
think
mean, the majority of Americans think ICE has gone too far. They've watched videos of like 79-year-old business owners be slammed to the ground and their ribs broken by ICE. So I think the American people are probably on board with that message at this point, Tommy.
Okay. Well, whoever you're talking to, I'm sure is. I'm not so sure the rest of the country is, but
You can just Google this and look for yourself, by the way. And it's true. More and more people are having an unfavorable view of ICE because of the way they're conducting their immigration crackdown. So anyways, that's it for that debate. It was just, it was an interesting thing to listen to. I was just listening to it last night, kind of chuckling to myself because of some of the zany and interesting things that Tomi Lahren was saying. But I just wanted to show you guys the state of conservative intellectual powerhouses and why it is the case that they choose to debate college students